So, like I said, tonight we are talking about my top tips for getting through the adolescence phase. I have raised a lot of puppies in my time. Service dogs, sporting dogs, herding dogs, search and rescue dogs, all kinds of things. And while there are certainly some differences in these different types of dogs and their underlying personalities, kind of what we choose them for, they all go through adolescence. So that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about tonight. Kind of my top do's and don'ts for getting through this phase. So the first one is you should build your reinforcement strategies. So do build your reinforcement strategies. Now, this can, excuse me, if you brought your dog home as a puppy, and he was extremely food motivated, as a lot of puppies are, it can be a little bit surprising if all of a sudden throughout adolescence he's not as interested in food as he was before. This is actually very common because as our dogs hit adolescence, they want freedom more than they want just about anything else, which means that our one piece of kibble or our one cookie that used to work great, now our dogs aren't so sure that it's worth it, right? That one cookie isn't necessarily worth giving up their freedom. They want freedom more than they want anything else. So you want to be working on your reinforcement strategies. The two things that this means to me primarily are building play with your dog so that you guys have a really good play rapport, so you can play tug of war, or you can play fetch, or you can play, there's all kinds of different play, and we have different resources in this group and in our academy, in our foundations course. We have a variety of resources on play available for you in a variety of different places. Because play really can be a fantastic way to build your relationship as well as a fantastic reinforcement. Now, the other thing is that this is a period of time where you really want to be watching your food motivation, sort of hygiene, as I tend to call it. Because while we want to be doing lots of things to help our adolescent dogs, including providing more freedom, like I just said, freedom is something they're going to want more than food. So we really have to be careful with our food hygiene at this time. So this can look like not free feeding your dogs. We don't want to leave food out all day long unless your vet has a very unless your vet gives you a reason to leave food out all day long. But if your vet tells you to do that, make sure you have the discussion with your vet that this is a service dog in training, and by leaving food out all day, you're very well going to squish his food motivation, making training more challenging. I have personally never seen that happen. Where a dog of this age needed to have food left out for a veterinary reason. However, I'm sure it exists, and so, of course, if your vet says otherwise, listen to your vet. But otherwise, do not leave food out for your dog all day long. You also want to be using... you want to generally use the lowest value reinforcer you can get away with. But before you just take that at face value, here's what I mean. When you're training your dog, think about if you use hot dogs at home, what are you going to use in the face of distractions? What are you going to use when you go out for socialization? What are you going to use when you go out to train your dog out and about? If you've already used that super high level distraction or reinforcer, if you've already used that really high level reinforcer at home, what are you going to use when you go out and about? Okay, one of the most damaging precedents we can set up for our dogs is that if you don't eat this, I will get something better out for you. So we want to be mindful of the reinforcers that we choose. At home, my dogs, all the way through adolescence and adulthood, only ever work for dog food, with very rare occasions for proofing or shaping very complex tasks. Otherwise, they are just getting dog food at home. During adolescence, when we go out and about, I am always using something higher value because I don't want to get into the position when I'm out and about where I hand my dog a piece of dog food and he goes, I don't really want that. And in order to salvage the situation, I have to get out the hot dogs because then again, I'm setting up that precedent that if you don't want what I have, I'll just get something better for you. So there's a variety of these sort of food hygiene tips, food motivation hygiene things that we want to keep in mind. But you want to be intentional and you want to be mindful of the way that you're using food reinforcers during this phase. And I want you to be liberal with your food reinforcers. I want you to reinforce everything all the time. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But be mindful. Okay, food motivation is absolutely something that usually gets squished by otherwise well-meaning trainers. Okay, so think about that. Now, the next one is don't offer a choice if there isn't one. Okay? I see this a lot. We don't want to trick our dog. Okay? That is absolutely falls under the category of offering a choice when there really isn't one. Tricking your dog will undermine all the trust that you are building. It will undermine everything. Do not trick your adolescent dog unless it is a safety emergency, right? And then obviously you do what you got to do. But this means, don't pull out the treat and say, "Oh, if you come over here, I'll give you a treat," and then you don't give that treat. Never ever trick your dog, right? Jingling the keys. We're going to go for a ride, and then we don't get in the car. We do not want to trick our adolescent dogs. Now, along with this, even things as simple as, offering a cue to get in the crate or offering the cue to come inside. If there really isn't a choice, if your dog isn't allowed to say, "I'd rather not," then maybe just don't. Like, maybe you should just go get your dog. Maybe you should just gently grab your dog's collar and place him in the crate. Now, I want to be clear, when I use collars in that manner, I have trained this ahead of time. My dogs are very comfortable with me grabbing their collars. They have huge reinforcement histories for that, and they know that when I grab their collar, I'm leading them somewhere. They're still going to probably get a cookie, because during adolescence, I really want to reinforce my dogs. I want reinforcement to come from me. So if I need them in a crate, I'm very likely going to just grab I do this with the adolescent dog currently in my home. If I need her in a crate because I have to leave and there is no other option, I generally am going to grab her collar, gently lead her to her crate, and then produce a handful of treats or dog food or a frozen Kong or something like that. So she's still getting reinforced for going in her crate. She's still doing it happily because of the training we've put into it. But I'm not going to offer her a choice and then have to not honor that. Okay, so I am never ever going to say, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And when my dog says no, not honor the no. Because again, that's a form of trickery, and we do not want to trick our adolescent dogs. It will backfire. It will always, always backfire. And I think that this discussion, when we talk about choice versus no choice, I think that depending on your training history, this either makes a lot of sense or maybe it doesn't make any sense. Because if you are coming from a training background that uses heavy, heavy amounts of positive reinforcement, and so you are coming from a training position where you don't force your dog to do things because you're using positive reinforcement to train things instead, this probably makes sense to you. If you're coming from a training background where you do use corrections, and so that is normal for you, then maybe this is a little different, and maybe this is something to consider. And that, whatever training methods you use is totally up to you. I'm just telling you my top tips for getting through adolescence. Now, the other thing that I do want you to do is build reinforcement histories, okay? So this is what we were just talking about, where I said I want you to reinforce everything as often as possible. Our dogs, during this phase, again, they are seeking freedom. During this phase, and really any other time, and this is one of the places that positive reinforcement training gets a bad rap, because people go, "Well, the one treat I have can never outweigh chasing wildlife or coming in from outside or greeting people or whatever the distraction is." And that's true. But a reinforcement history might be able to. So what we want to do during adolescence is really, really be spending time creating deep, big, rich reinforcement histories. Lots of reinforcement for going into crates, coming when called, walking on a leash, going on a dog bed. Because then what happens is that cue, it's not being backed up just by the one treat you're going to offer in this moment. So when I tell my adolescent dog to go in her crate, it's not just the one treat I may offer her at this point. It is every treat I have ever given her for going in her crate. And that reinforcement history is far more likely to stand up to distractions later on down the road. That reinforcement history is also being associated with me. So now I'm becoming just as interesting as the environment over time. This is not going to happen necessarily overnight. But if you think about it like a bank account, every time you give your dog a treat for a specific behavior, you are putting a deposit into that bank account. Okay? Every time you take a treat, or every time you don't reinforce, you are taking a treat out. So think about which behaviors are getting the reinforcement histories. We want really, really padded bank accounts. So when it comes to coming when called, for example, we want that bank account to be so big that it is a no-brainer for your dog to come when called. That reinforcement history takes time, and it is imperative that you're working on that at this point. Now, Kathy Sadeo's Smart Times 50 protocol, I talked about this in the last live I was on in this. I've talked about this in our adolescence workshop. Smart Times 50 is a great way to do this. So Kathy Sadeo talks about it in her book, Plenty in Life is Free. And it stands for See, Mark, and Reward Training. I've got lots of resources on this, so I won't talk about it too much. Basically, you're just going to count out 50 healthy treats a day, and you're going to deliver those to your dog for just all the good things he does throughout the day. Coming when called, chewing on his own stuff, getting into his crate, these types of things, okay? And that way, you're doing this throughout the day. It's not just happening during training sessions. So Smart Times 50, okay? This is it's like throwing gasoline on your training fire. It really helps speed things up. Okay, I just want to look at my notes. Build reinforcement histories. Nope, that's all I wanted to talk about there, okay? Super important. Now, the next don't is don't punish behaviors that you want. Now, this should sound obvious, and in a lot of ways it is. But, for example, if you call your dog, if your dog dashes out the door without permission and it goes running down the street, and you call him back and he comes back but it's really slow, and then you either correct him or you don't reinforce him because he escaped without permission and he didn't come back fast enough, you really are just not reinforcing coming when called. Your dog did the behavior. And by not reinforcing it, you're essentially punishing the behavior you want to see. The same thing happens if you call your dog to do something he doesn't like. If he doesn't like having his nail trimmed and you call him and you clip his nails, you're essentially punishing coming when called. If you're out doing something off leash, you're at some sort of safe place for your dog to be off leash and you call him to you and put him in the car, again, you've ended the fun after calling him. These are all situations where you really should just go get your dog. A human example of this that's really common is not calling parents enough, right? And then when you do finally call your parent and they just nag you about how you never ever call, basically they've just punished you for doing the exact behavior that they want. So we really want to pay attention to this during adolescence. It's important all the time, but it's especially important during adolescence when our dogs are, again, seeking freedom and seeking reinforcement. Now, the next do is use management and exercise. Management and exercise. Management is when we set up the environment so that our dogs can succeed. I talk about this a lot in puppy raising. I talk about this a lot in adolescence. I talk about this in our adolescence workshop. If you've been following me a while, you're probably sick of me talking about management. It really is imperative. That is how we set our dogs up to succeed. We want to have dog-proofed areas of the house so that we're not constantly having to tell them, no, don't do that, no, don't do this, because the space is safe. There isn't a bad decision to be made because we've dog-proofed the area. Or if we have specific problem behaviors, we want to manage those as best we can. Your dog gets in the garbage, maybe put the garbage behind a closed door. You can circle back to that later when you have less going on. For example, my adolescent dog when she was younger, she really, during mealtime, she would get really excited. She would put her feet up on the counter. She would bounce around, and she was just very hectic. Obviously, this is something we want to change. But at that time, we had so many bigger fish to fry that we just managed it. All I did was grab her food first, put her in her crate, and feed her while I'm getting the other dog's food ready. This obviously doesn't teach her how to behave during meal prep, but it does prevent the rehearsal of the behavior that I don't like so that it's not being reinforced. It's not happening over and over. I'm not getting frustrated and I'm not losing my temper with her, and she's not getting punished, and we're not put in a position to be at odds because I have managed the situation. And this allows me to take my time, my energy, and her training attention span for the day and put it on other things that are more important at the time. So for her coming when called, for example. Then we can circle back to it later. So if your dog is getting into the garbage during adolescence, I'm betting you have bigger training fish to fry. You probably have other things you need to be training. So maybe just put the garbage behind a closed door and circle back to that in a few months when you have more time. Prioritizing is really, really huge. But one of the other things that really helps to set our adolescent dogs up for success is making sure that we're providing adequate exercise. And this is the exercise formula. This is something, again, I've talked about before. I talk about in the adolescence workshop. This is really important that we are providing our adolescent service dogs, even if your dog isn't a service dog, but all of our adolescent dogs really do need their requirements for exercise to be met. So I find that the exercise formula is a really great way to do this. About 20 minutes, give or take, of exercise 10 minutes of mental exercise, so training, and then providing them something to chew on. And this helps to step our dogs down from exercise and meet all their needs for physical and mental exercise. And then chewing tends to help them settle back down. So this does a couple things. It meets our dog's requirements for mental and physical exercise so that they aren't getting too bored. They don't have excess energy, and so therefore they're finding unproductive things to do with that exercise, or that energy, excuse me. And it helps to teach our dogs to settle, because adolescent dogs do struggle with that, right? Learning to settle. We talked about this in the settle video we did last week, so you can find that replay. And we talk about teaching an adolescent dog to settle, and we talk about the exercise formula there, as well as Smart Times 50, because all these things are connected and they're all really important. So then my final do for you is watch our 4-part adolescent workshop. Now, I put the link to this in the description of this video. And in there, we cover the neuroscience that you really need to understand, the types of behaviors you really need to be focusing on, how you can help your adolescent dog during the day. All these things are covered in our 4-part workshop. So the link to that workshop is in the description of this video, and that's totally free. It's 4 sort of 20-ish minute videos, or depending on when you're watching this, there either are 4 already or there will be 4, because part 3 just came out. So if you're watching the replay, all 4 might be there. But as of today, August 24th, there are 3 parts already. And it's really important things for you to understand to navigate this period of development. Because while adolescence really is challenging, I get that, I've lived it with a variety of dogs, with a variety of temperaments, it is also a window of opportunity for putting our dogs on a trajectory that's going to set them up for long-term success. And the workshop is full of information that you really need to know in order to do that. So that